Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 5th of March 2025. There's an awful lot to go through. I have like 8,000 different tabs here, and I've got a whole section on the US and the trade wars with China and Canada, etc., and the effect on the economy and how that pertains to the war potentially as well. But I might have to cut that off because this video might end up being too long. We're going to start with the US. We're going to go to Europe. We're going to look at France for an explicit segment, and then circle back to the US and peace talks. Let's start with the State of the Union speech last night, because it was what was it? It was a suite of lies. There's no doubt about that. But there was a fair bit in there about Ukraine. Doesn't paint Ukraine particularly in a good light. This is what Trump said.
Earlier today, I received an important letter from President Zelensky of Ukraine. The letter reads, Ukraine is ready to come to the negotiating table as soon as possible to bring lasting peace closer. Nobody wants peace more than the Ukrainians, he said. My team and I stand ready to work under President Trump's strong leadership to get a peace that lasts. We do really value how much America has done to help Ukraine maintain its sovereignty and independence. Regarding the agreement on minerals and security, Ukraine is ready to sign it at any time that is convenient for you. I appreciate that he sent this letter, just got it a little while ago. Simultaneously, we've had serious discussions with Russia and have received strong signals that they are ready for peace. Wouldn't that be beautiful? Wouldn't that be beautiful? Earlier.
There's a couple of things I find really distasteful here. One is that everyone's clapping because Russia are ready for peace, but didn't clap when Ukraine are ready for peace, when Ukraine are the ones that have had all the pressure to make concessions and to give away their natural resources, and Russia have had absolutely no concessions, to the point where actually some journalists are now starting to ask, JD Vance was asked this, well, why have you put nothing on Russia? And he gave some fumbling answer. So I find it distasteful they're all standing up and clapping that, when what this is a public display of submission to the US. And my friend contacted me this morning and said, look, you know, what's going on there in terms of the US, you know, or Zelensky doing exactly what Trump wants. You know, why can't he just tell Trump to, basically said, why can't he tell Trump to F off? I don't know why he wants to work with the US anymore. Trump will F him over at any opportunity. And this is someone with an American passport as well. This is someone that he's got really interesting family in America, where they're kind of split 50-50, and a lot of them are like deep in Trump world. So he knows Trump world really, really, really well. And I said, because the US are that important. So it's not so much about military aid, but that is vital. Only really Patriot Pac-3 interceptors shoot down ballistic missiles, and they have to come from the US. Europe has the SAMP-T, but only a couple of those are in Ukraine. So there are some necessary munitions, and I could bore you with more, that can only be provided by the US. But in my humble opinion, more importantly, there are these two things as to why Zelensky has to submit to the US, and he's being forced to by the US, and the US kind of know this. So they are playing with Zelensky like a cat plays with a mouse. And I just find this deeply horrible, because there's no morality involved. There's no long-term strategizing. This is how much can we extract from this poor little mouse that we're playing with. So anyway, the reasons why Zelensky has to do this groveling is because they need, obviously, military equipment that only the US can provide, but also sanctions. Biden's Treasury Department did an amazing job on these, particularly the last round just before the inauguration. These are effing Russia over big time, and Trump is looking to relieve Russia of their sanctions. I mean, you know, WTF on that. And then the second part is that Ukraine require intelligence, satellite connectivity, Starlink, satellite imagery, etc. US is vital for intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. In order for Ukraine to acquire targets and even use their existing weapons, they need the US. Even with some European weapons, there is dependency on US tech and comms for target acquisition. The US had them over a barrel. And they allowed the US to have them over a barrel because the US were providing them with an awful lot of stuff that they desperately needed. So yeah. It doesn't matter if we're dependent on you because you're a dependable ally. Except that the US have become a not dependable ally. In fact, they are no longer an ally of Ukraine. The US are more interested in, and we'll get to this because actually it's a fascinating appraisal of this by Anthony Scaramucci. I think he says it in his bit, where basically they just want a quick piece because that's the easiest piece and it's a piece that gets them the most moolah, the most minerals, the most economic deals. They are not interested in Ukraine prevailing. So once you understand that, everything else falls into place. Edward Hunter Christie, Anton Gerashchenko says in his speech in Congress, President Trump repeated his previous statements regarding Ukraine. He believes that the US spent more money than Europe. I'm not even going to play it to you because it irritates me that much. He basically lied about Ukraine. He said that he received signals from Putin that Russia is ready for peace. Wouldn't that be beautiful? And then Edward Hunter Christie says a moment of infamy for the US Congress, applauding the dictated peace that America imposes, like we just heard, on a friendly nation, applauding words out of that nation's leader that were extracted under duress. So that letter from Zelensky was written under duress. And there are some people saying, actually, if they do a deal on minerals with the US, it might not stand up under international law if they break it in some years from here, which is one of the reasons why they might have been more willing to sign it, although we'll also get onto this later because actually it's looking like the US doesn't want to sign it at the moment because it's too nice to Ukraine. But anyway, if it can be argued it was signed under duress, then they could get out of fulfilling that contract or that agreement. But basically, the shortest summary of the State of the Union speech comes from Democrat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett from Texas, who says, or representing Texas, who says this.
This is not what we should be doing. I don't even know why we fighting with Greenland. Why we fighting with Greenland? We fighting with Canada. We fighting with Mexico. Yet we in love with Putin. What is happening? Like, this is not America. This is a terrible nightmare. Somebody slap me and wake me the fuck up because I'm ready to get on with it.
Slap me around and wake me the F up because I'm ready to get on with this because this is a nightmare. I want to get on and solve this nightmare. What is this nightmare where we're in love with Putin and we're hating all our allies? And basically the State of the Union speech did all of that. Greenland, I mean, this is just insanity.
We also have a message tonight for the incredible people of Greenland. We strongly support your right to determine.
The fact that these two absolute gimps behind Donald Trump are laughing. Isn't it funny that we're just going to threaten Greenland? The lovely people of Greenland, we're coming to get your land. NATO country, Denmark, overseeing Greenland, we're going to have you. Doesn't matter that you're in NATO. Doesn't matter that you're an ally. We are going to have you.
We strongly support your right to determine your own future. And if you choose, we welcome you into the United States of America. We need Greenland for national security and even international security, and we're working with everybody involved to try and get it. But we need it really for international world security. And I think we're going to get it. One way or the other, we're going to get it.
So he said you have a right to self-determination and then makes a hilarious joke where these guys laugh as well and the politicians laugh when he says we're going to get it one way or the other. You have a right to self-determination. Of course, we wouldn't coerce you. We don't do coercion. Shut up, Zelensky. Shh. We don't do I told you. Shush. We don't do coercion. And we certainly won't invade. And we won't use economic clout to force you into doing something you didn't want to do. We don't do that, but you will be ours one way or the other. You will be ours. You will be ours one way or the other. The United States have become the bad guys. Sorry, Trump's administration, Trump's United States have become the bad guys.
National security and even international security, and we're working with everybody involved to try and get it. But we need it really for international world security, and I think we're going to get it. One way or the other, we're going to get it. We also have a message tonight for the...
One way or the other, we're going to get it. So sorry, that was the end of that piece. But yeah, Constantine says, let me get this right. Greenland is to be used as a shield. Trump's message to the people of Greenland is a naked threat. We're going to get Greenland one way or the other. And the laughs are all the more chilling. Absolutely agreed. Trump says he'll be reclaiming the Panama Canal to rapturous applause, and that he's already started on it. The camera shifts to Rubio. We're buying both ports around the Panama Canal, lots of things having to do with the canal and other canals.
It will have a huge impact. To further enhance our national security, my administration will be reclaiming the Panama Canal, and we've already started doing it. Just today, a large American company announced they are buying both ports around the Panama Canal and lots of other things having to do with the Panama Canal and a couple of other canals.
Marco Rubio there. Please get me out of here. Please get me out of here.
It will have a huge...
And so what's interesting about Marco Rubio, and we're going to come on to him in a second, actually. We're going to come back to that Panama thing, but it's about what Donald Trump... In fact, let's go there and then come back to this. So it's a small point in the scheme of things, says the analyst, but 47, that's Trump, made some strange comments about Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Do I have the... Oh, no, I don't have the recording of it. That's annoying. In his State of the Union speech, he played up his designs on taking the Panama Canal and noted he's put Rubio in charge of that. He then went on, now we know who to blame if anything goes wrong. 47 emphasised. He then went on to cite Rubio's 99-0 confirmation vote, which he said was 100-0. He said, I'm either very happy about that or I'm very concerned about it, Trump said. So as usual, he lays out tests of capabilities and most of all loyalty. But the confirmation comment was about the fact that all the Democrat senators voted for Rubio, which in Trump's mind means that they like him, which means that that's a bad thing and therefore makes Rubio a suspect and potentially an inside anti-Trump operator out there to tone things down and undermine his agenda. This is a deeply humiliating time for Rubio to be talked of in a State of the Union speech and made to look suspect. So there are lots of memes and photo clips of the look on his face when this was going on and looking really uncomfortable. It doesn't help his already diminished role in the administration, and the fact is there is the Democratic senators vote on belief that Rubio was the best choice for his understanding of foreign policy and that he might talk sense into the administration. Yet we have all seen what happened last Friday as he sat there appalled but silent and then threw himself on the altar of flattering Trump just minutes later. A spineless, cowering wreck who suddenly realises he should have stayed in the Senate. I really think that's a correct appraisal. In fact, the Clash report here reporting that GOP sources say, and this is coming from Vanity Fair, say Rubio has told people that he, quote, is upset by his lack of foreign policy influence despite being the administration's top diplomat. So, hey, I'm Secretary of State, but he's telling people I have no influence. And you kind of know this because he's just gone to Russia or gone to Riyadh and Ankara to talk to, or was it Istanbul, to talk to Russia with the US team, but basically capitulating to Russia's demands and then having to go and feed that back to the general public in a form that this is a great win. Quote, one said that they felt as though Rubio is often the last to know when foreign policy decisions are made in the White House. And this kind of fake, I should really play it to you, but when Trump says that stuff about Rubio, you can just, you can read through read between the lines there what Trump is doing, it seems to me fairly obvious that is a veiled threat to Rubio. The old's going to be nice to him, laugh about him, but you really know what he's saying. And the idea that, if it goes wrong with Panama, we know who to blame. It's like classic Trump needs a scapegoat for anything that might go wrong. And then we had this. So the first president of the US ever to have an unelected bureaucrat in the Oval Office after that guy bankrolled his campaign, so this is Elon Musk, with $250 million, just congratulate himself for draining the swamp and announce the days of the rule of the unelected bureaucrats are over. You can't make this up.
We are draining the swamp. It's very simple. And the days of rule by unelected bureaucrats are over. We are draining.
And actually, you heard there was some laughing in the background. Democrats did laugh at that because, and I think some of them pointed at Musk or said something afterwards. Just hilarious. But there you go. Jim Sciutto saying, to be clear, the US is leveling punishing tariffs on its allies while discussing easing sanctions on Russia. And that was apparent from the State of the Union speech as well, where Trump again just vomited out lies about Ukraine and indeed Europe. Here's the reality. So the claim that Trump has is that the US has spent $350 billion on Ukraine. Important to note that none of that under Trump, all of that under Biden. And then that Europe has done 100 billion. But the reality is that Europe's done 138 billion, and it's been fairly consistent, and the US has done 120 billion, which is a third of what he's claiming effectively. It's an absolute disgrace that he still gets away with these lies. It just does me in. Interesting that CNN says that their poll sample of the State of the Union speech had 14% more Republicans. So it skewed Republican as a poll. 14% more Republicans than the population, and that the Trump speech ranked below every previous Trump speech in Congress and below his predecessor's first speeches to Congress. So actually, this was not seen as a particularly good speech, even by Republicans, although it's obviously very well received by the Republican Congress people. Okay, we're going to come back to a lot of that because there's an awful lot more to say in terms of peace deals, but that was a big thing that happened last night. Okay, in terms of European geopolitics and the wider world, Italy welcomed Volodymyr Zelensky yesterday. Giorgia Meloni is a very important politician, mover and shaker in the context of Ukraine because she's a European leader who is far right, as far right as you get really for actual leaders of the country in Europe. And she, although we can have questions about Viktor Orban, I guess, but she's kind of pro-European these days, to the point where she's been quite surprising in being very strongly pro-Ukrainian, and therefore is seen as someone who can whisper in Trump's ear. So look out for Meloni. I mean, she's long been thought to be a potential bridge between Europe and Trump, rather than Viktor Orban. And the thing about Keir Starmer is he's going to be strongly in support of Ukraine, but coming from a centre-left position in the UK. And actually, Giorgia Meloni could be a more useful bridge. So no surprise to me that Zelensky was there yesterday. Now, there's going to be this huge meeting tomorrow. We already know that Viktor Orban's put up some resistance. It looks like a 20 billion euro aid package to Ukraine is being stalled by Viktor Orban. And then we have this massive meeting tomorrow that is in an emergency meeting as a result of kind of what the US has done, and also with regard to, an aid needed to Ukraine. So Federalist MPs from the Volt group have called, the pan-European group in Brussels, has called for treaty reforms ahead of Thursday's EU summit. They've come out with a 9-point action plan that includes stripping Hungary of voting rights, making Kaja Kallas the EU foreign minister, creating a European army, and preparing for enlargement. So getting Ukraine and maybe Moldova in there. So interesting, this may not well happen by any stretch, but there are demands from within inside Europe that something needs to be done about Hungary, and I couldn't agree more. But I guess we'll have to see if that manifests itself in anything meaningful. Now, Zelensky, as well as paying kind of fealty to Donald Trump, also, if you go and look at his Twitter feed, like surrounding that message he put out to the Americans, which is broadly what you heard in that speech by Trump, you had all these, thank you, I just spoke to the Prime Minister of Finland, to Keir Starmer, and blah, blah, blah. He did an awful lot of speaking to European leaders yesterday. So today, he said, I spoke with the leaders of Finland, UK, Greece, Croatia, NATO, Germany, CDU, so that's Friedrich Merz. Clear and unwavering support for Ukraine. Grateful for it. Important news from the European Commission. Significant funds for Europe's defence, meaning more air defence systems, missiles, and protection for our cities and frontline positions. Every step brings us closer to ending this war. Consultations continue, and new joint actions will follow. Ukraine deserves peace. Ukrainians deserve respect. So an important day of interactions with world leaders yesterday for Zelensky. The question is always going to be how quickly can aid from Europe get to Ukraine. You know, these decisions, these ideas such as Ursula von der Leyen and, you know, up to 800 billion euros for Europe, how much of that will be for Ukraine, how much will find itself to Ukraine, and will that happen, and how quickly will it happen? And then, of course, whatever gets decided tomorrow, tick-tock. Germany examines options to prevent the Baltic Sea pipeline's Nord Stream 2 revival amid secret US-Russia talks about purchasing it. Talks reportedly involving Trump face resistance in Germany. Experts warn it would strengthen US-Russian ties. I have, like I've said to you a number of times now, I've given up with the US. They have joined sides and they are now just working on behalf of Russia. I don't see it any other way. They've done nothing at all, not a scintilla of action to put pressure on Russia. Not once. All the pressure's been on Ukraine, and I find it absolutely unconscionable. Keir Starmer has persuaded Zelensky to offer Trump an olive branch after their argument. In a phone call, Starmer told Zelensky the hard truth about what Trump wanted to hear, according to the Daily Telegraph, and that could be why we saw the statement, the letter from Zelensky to Trump. It's this: you've got to say this, you've got to say that, you've really got to thank him. I mean, it's all about Trump, really, isn't it? It's really important to understand motivations, to understand, why things happen. All this, you need to thank Trump. You need to thank Trump. I need some appreciation. Well, actually, you've done nothing for Ukraine. That was Joe Biden's administration. Yeah, but I want to be thanked. And so the peace deal is nothing about peace for Ukraine, is it? It's about appealing to Trump, appeasing him, showering with golden praise. It's really, really frustrating. It's all about him rather than working for what is good and right. Like, really, the people involved in these peace negotiations should almost be unknown. Like, I am working as a human being for the betterment of the world so that peace happens that is just and sustainable. Trump is like, it doesn't need to be just. I just want peace and I want it really quickly, and actually it needs to benefit the United States, and I want a Nobel Peace Prize. British tabloids some of them have gone to town on JD Vance. So much has happened yesterday, not all of them concentrated on this. But had this been the only thing that happened yesterday, all of the papers would have done this. But it's really interesting that both the Daily Star and the Daily Express, if you lose the Daily Express, like I said the other day, Daily Mail and Express, these are Daily Express is the most right-wing of the mainstream newspapers in the UK, right? And if JD Vance has lost the Daily Express, that tells you where the public sentiment is in the UK. Now, this was over JD Vance essentially slagging off European soldiers, saying, random soldiers from random European countries who haven't fought a war in 30 to 40 years being, peacekeepers. And he said, I did my whole breaking news update on this yesterday, where he was saying, well, an economic deal with the US, a minerals deal, which will have US workers in Ukraine is far stronger than that. So there are two things that are wrong with that. One is empirically false, because there were many, many workers in Ukraine when Russia invaded in 2022. So that's a load of rubbish. And also, he's slagging off Europe, random countries. So there are only two countries that said they're going to put their troops forward, and that's UK and France. So those random countries can only be UK and France. And he comes out later because there was so much of a pushback. And he said, I didn't mean UK and France. Well, who do you mean? Because most of these European nations came to the US's aid when Article 5 was invoked and provided troops for Afghanistan and Iraq and etc. etc. So it's wrong and insulting, to the point where the Daily Star says Trump deputies vile slur on Brit heroes JD Dunce, and they put a dunce hat on him. Vance slams us as a random country who haven't fought for a war for 40 years, but 636 of our troops died in Afghanistan and Iraq fighting alongside the US. And then we have the Daily Express saying clown Vance's slur on 636 war heroes. Blundering US Vice President says Britain has not fought a war in 40 years. And it's not gone down well. A lot of people unhappy. And interestingly, James cleverly, so Kemi Badenoch has come out as the leader of the Conservative Party and broadly tried to excuse JD Vance. But other people in the Conservative Party were absolutely enraged by this. James cleverly's been really vocal in denigrating this kind of rhetoric and generally the US's positioning. Now, Daily Mail also reports that Macron and Starmer are ready to travel to Washington with Zelensky next week to present a plan on resolving the war in Ukraine. And it could well involve this Anglo-French proposal of a truce in the skies and the sea contingent upon Putin's agreement. This would require an end to Russia's nightly bombardment of Ukrainian cities with missiles and drones, something essential if the US air defense systems run dry as a result of Trump's pause in military aid. So there are reasons why they've chosen to demand that there is a truce in the skies. If the Americans don't lift the embargo on military aid going to Ukraine, then Ukraine will not get the interceptors they need to defend their cities. So as a result of Trump's pause on military aid. In other words, Zelensky is already dependent upon Europe in his contest with the United States. Now, Western Australia, it's a big old place, Western Australia. Go and look at a map. Pretty sizable, geographically speaking. Well, the Premier of Western Australia called JD Vance a knob yesterday in an interview. So for those Americans, people don't maybe know that is very much a British, Australian pejorative, a penis. That's what a knob is. So you call someone a knob, you're calling them a penis. And he's done that in public in an interview. And he said, that's going to get me in trouble, but it's true, or something like that. I did read it, but absolutely fantastic. Yep, JD Vance is not making friends abroad. So if any of you out there are still massive Trump fans and Trump administration fans, just understand that abroad, people aren't looking particularly well on the Trump administration. In fact, we're going to come to that in a second with some more data. This is a real shame, although Milei is just he's batshit crazy, really. So he's this anarcho-capitalist that's in charge of Argentina, trying to get its beleaguered economy operating better. I mean, there are some indications he's having a positive effect in certain areas, others that it's still terrible. So the jury's still out on whether that is going to work. But he's been a massive supporter of Ukraine, but he's also a massive supporter of the US and Trump. And so this whole Trump-Zelensky fracas, I think, has led him supposedly to have deleted his photos his public photos with Zelensky. And that's a real shame, because you need as many allies as you can get. Now, Bloomberg reports that Putin has agreed to help Trump to mediate negotiations with Iran regarding nuclear weapons. Oh my goodness. Just like Trump has got into bed with Putin. I mean, what is going on there? According to sources in Moscow, Trump informed Putin of his interest during a phone call in February, and high-ranking officials from the US and Russia discussed the matter during a meeting in Saudi Arabia. Like the Russians are thinking all their Christmases have come at once. And in fact, there are a number of people saying this. Terja Helland has said, the transatlantic alliance faces an uncomfortable truth. The instability of the US politics isn't just about Trump. It's about the deeper flaws in American democracy itself, flaws that make the US an unreliable pillar of Western security. This is a security threat. Now, my own personal opinion is that a narrow two-party electoral system that is becoming ever more polarized with each election means that just by the very nature of that system, the US will be more and more unstable and an unreliable partner. Now, in the old days, like, you would agree who your allies were. So even if you went from Democrats to Republicans to Democrats, it's like, well, yeah, Europe and UK are obviously our allies. But now we got to this point where MAGA is so freaking fried in the brain that they would rather have Russia as an ally than Europe. And that's where we are. So Helen says, look, Trump, a convicted fraudster, rapist and insurrectionist isn't an outlier. The fact that he can win power again is a symptom of systemic weakness. In any functioning democracy, such a figure would be politically extinct. In the US, he was the GOP's first choice. How do we get here? It's complicated, but two core flaws make American democracy structurally unstable. Money in politics. Citizens United allows billionaires to buy elections. So you need to go back to the Supreme Court ruling for Citizens United, which basically allowed vast amounts of money back into political activity. Electoral system design. A few swing states decide everything, make it easy to manipulate outcomes. Unlike in Europe, at least my country, where politicians resign over minor infractions, the US system enables criminals to return to power when legal accountability means nothing. The money outweighs the votes. When courts are stacked, how democratic is the US really? And in fact, on the democracy index, the US is falling and falling. And is now seen as a hybrid democracy, not even a full democracy, which is fascinating. Isn't this just about domestic politics? If the US can't guarantee stable governance, how can Europe, Canada, Australia, Taiwan or Japan trust it with their security? By the way, I don't want anyone telling me that the US is not a democracy. It's a representative democratic republic. Like, go and look at what it is. I've done a whole segment of video on this about 2 years ago because I got sick and tired of people almost entirely on the further to the right saying the US isn't a democracy, it's a republic. No, it's a representative democratic republic. It's both of those things. You need to understand politics to understand that. Anyway, NATO's backbone has always been US leadership, but when that leadership can swing between Biden's internationalism and Trump's isolationism on a whim, the alliance itself is on borrowed time, and this is the point. Europe must wake up. The old assumption that the US will always be there as a security guarantor is dead. A country that can be hijacked by extremists every 4 years is no foundation for defense and security. What's the solution? Well, the West must build an independent security framework. Europe must expand its defense capacity. Canada, Australia, Taiwan, and Japan must coordinate more closely. NATO must prepare for a world where the US support is conditional or absent. This is not an anti-American argument. It's about recognizing reality. The US remains a vital partner, but the era of blind dependence on the US is over. The West needs a backup plan before it's too late. The biggest threat to the Western alliance isn't just Russia or China. It's the fragility of US democracy itself. If we don't prepare for post-American security order now, we may not get a second chance. And I think that's a really salient thread. Now, talking about fragile democracies, here's Serbian parliament, where firecrackers have been going off. Clashes have broken out in the Serbian parliament. Right in a meeting hall, deputies are throwing smoke bombs and firecrackers. Absolutely incredible there. And there's been a lot of discontent in Serbia, which is not in the EU, for those who are not quite aware. But it's on the edge of Europe and on the edge of the EU, and has been desiring accession for some time, but I don't think Vucic is particularly serious about it. But there have been some sizable protests there, which is, I think, good in those demanding kind of better democracy. Right, we're going to go on to France now, and we've seen yesterday some really fascinating declarations in the assembly. So Marine Le Pen She's the leader of Rassemblement National, who are basically the French version of AFD, far right, but they've been trying to become more and more digestible to the general public, and so they changed their names from the National Front to National Rally because there's less baggage with National Rally, and tried to do things like say. So Jordan Bardella was over at CPAC recently when Steve Bannon did a Nazi salute, and Jordan Bardella said, actually, this is too much. I'm not going to do a speech. So he cancelled his speech at CPAC. So it's kind of like, right, we'll go up to this point, but anything over that is not going to go down well enough with the public. And we need to, like, it's a bit like if you see, this might be a bit controversial for people. So the National Front in the UK, when we had the National Front, then became the BNP, and then like iterations of that ended up becoming UKIP, and that moved on to the Brexit Party and Reform. People will absolutely contest that the BNP went to UKIP, but I would say that was the evolution, and that's what you need to do in order to get power. So if you are on the far right, like, you've got to realise that there's an absolute hard ceiling to where you're going to go. They were saying this about like AFD, like you are not going to get more than sort of 25% of the vote realistically. Now, when you do coalitions in Europe, then that's a bit different because you can still get into power with a coalition government. But say in the UK, where it's first past the post and we don't really have coalition governments, then what do you do if you're BNP? How do you appeal to enough of the public to become meaningful and actually get politicians elected? Well, actually, you have to just tame down your rhetoric until you get to this acceptable point. And there's a sweet spot. Well, the sweet spot is like centrism, but when you're purely centrist, there's not enough emotional kind of, yeah, I'm really fired up about the centre. No, you get fired up about the far left and the far right. So the question is, for either of those, the far left and the far right, if you're serious about power, how far do you tame your rhetoric until you find that point where people are okay with voting for you, where you are digestible enough, as I say, for a larger chunk of the electorate. So this is what Marine Le Pen has done. She said, right, we've got to be sensible enough. And it's kind of what the Green parties have done in many places in Europe. The German Green Party's done this. Like, we don't want to go so far to the left that we're just not electable. We need to become sensible with our rhetoric and our policies. So Marine Le Pen is trying this with Rassemblement National. And yesterday, considering the connections with Russia and the Russian money that has funded the Rassemblement National party previously, it was staggering that she came out yesterday and condemned the brutality of the US decision to suspend aid to Ukraine. The president of the National Rally Group told the newspaper that she considers, quote, the brutality of this decision to be reprehensible and that it was cruel to the Ukrainian soldiers who are patriotically defending their country. So she's been really critical, condemned the US decision to suspend military aid to Ukraine, which means by extension, she is supportive now of military aid to Ukraine. Is this a change of position of Rassemblement National? Because they've previously been like, yeah, we don't want aid to go to Ukraine, but we do recognise that Russia are the bad guys type thing. Well, actually, are they taking this a step further? Why is this happening? Why is this turnaround happening? Here we have the MEP for National Rally, Pierre-Romain Thionnet, saying Ukrainian capitulation would mean a cessation of fighting by definition, but it would certainly not bring peace or a return to a more stable order on the continent. Okay, so this is then much more pro-Ukrainian rhetoric coming from the far right in France. Again, why is this happening? Then you start understanding that they're going to be looking at the polls. It's all about, well, if we don't align ourselves at all with what people are thinking, then we're not going to maintain power. So we need to be keeping an eye on where the general sense of the electorate is, and then tap into that. So when you got Le Point, which is a really major French magazine, calling Trump Moscow's man, l'homme du Moscou, Putin et Trump, l'alliance des prédateurs. So that is Putin and Trump is an alliance of predators. So they're just wanting to carve up Ukraine. So talks. So what do we have? The game of Macron, the options for Europe, and the shadow of China. So that's what's going on there. Okay, well, so what? That's just one magazine. Now, 73% of French people now no longer see the US as an ally. Goodness me. So, as PS01 says, this explains why Le Pen has made a U-turn on Russia. So we have war in Ukraine for 73% of French people. United States is no longer an ally of France. Interesting. Okay. So now you have Le Pen and Rassemblement National going, right, if we go hard in support for Trump and Vance and for Russia, we are going to lose credibility. We've seen that in the UK, right? So you've had, apart from Kemi Badenoch and JD Vance yesterday, broadly speaking, Conservatives have come out and been really condemning of the US and their approach to the White House meeting with Zelensky and Russian appeasement. It's about reading the room, and the room in the UK is very different to the room in the US, and we're going to come on to that point in a wee while because it's fascinating about public opinion in the US. Now, again, another French person here. This is Senator Claude Malloret. I don't know his party. We were at war with a dictator. Now we're fighting against a dictator supported by a traitor. So you've got French politicians coming out and calling Trump a traitor. Then you've got, after the socialists and the centrists and the Republican right, and you can argue Rassemblement National as well, the Greens expressed their support for Ukraine and call for a European awakening. They call for the use of frozen Russian assets, increased arms supplies to Ukraine, and more French troops in the Baltic states. You've got the Green Party aligning in France with the Green Party of Germany in being staunch supporters of Ukraine, and it really only leaves like the far left in France as being not supportive of Ukraine. The really interesting shift there in the French political dynamics. Now, Macron is going to give a big speech tonight on national television. He's going to deliver a high-stakes speech at 8 p.m. CET as France and Central European time, as France and Europe navigate a period of growing geopolitical and economic turbulence. He's going to say, at this great time of uncertainty, when the world is facing its greatest challenges, I will address you tonight at 8 p.m. So we don't know what he's going to say and whether it will give us anything new, but watch out for that one. And he's also said that he's ready to start discussions on nuclear deterrence with European allies. So this is the idea that France particularly, but France and the UK as the only nuclear nations in Europe could provide a nuclear umbrella for Europe, given that the US has gone rogue. It's the idea that, well, the US is no longer a stable ally. So, you can have a go at me for talking about how the US has gone rogue, whatever, but this is what Europeans think, and this is how we see the reality. And the reality is, well, if we can't trust the US, and we need a nuclear umbrella, we need to do it ourselves. Now, I say the French are slightly different from the UK there, because the UK, we depend to a significant degree on the American for our nuclear capabilities in terms of maintenance, software, and all sorts of stuff, and hardware, whereas the French are completely independent. Okay, so let's now move on to the US more explicitly. As you can see, there's a ton to go through here. Right, let's start with, first of all, the Ukrainians, both in the Verkhovna Rada, and we went through this on the live stream the other night with Greg Terry, and Zelensky himself have come out and kind of shown their submission to the United States in a way of trying to grovel to the US to get them back on side, because they absolutely desperately need them. So it's both the Verkhovna Rada and Zelensky. Everyone realizes that the US is desperately necessary for Ukrainian survival. However, I don't think personally it's worth it. As in, not that it's not worth it. It's worth trying, but don't think it's going to happen. I don't think Trump has a moral bone in his body that is skewing towards Ukraine. he couldn't give one toss about the outcome of the war, morally speaking, politically speaking, from a moral political point of view. He's interested in what he can gain in terms of economic deals for the US. That's all he cares about. So you've had this Zelensky statement here, which you can read. I'm not going to read it, but it's just saying how important the US is and how they want to get everything back on track. So, okay, we've had that. What else before we get on to a long point I'm going to make? So, Shashank Joshi here, quoting from Defense News. I've talked about this before. People keep getting either interviewed or they are in hearings for whether they are going to be selected as, in this case, picked for lead policy for the Pentagon, and asked whether they think Russia invaded Ukraine, and they can't answer it. This guy, President Donald Trump's pick to lead policy for the Pentagon, wouldn't say that Russia invaded Ukraine, making him the second top Defense Department nominee in a week to equivocate on the question of a confirmation hearing. At one point, in response to questioning from Senator Mazie Hirono, from a Democrat from Hawaii, Colby said that Russia sending troops across a border into Ukraine 3 years ago was a factual reality. Still, he declined to call that an act of invasion. So this does set us up for the larger point. So the larger point I'm going to make, it comes on to this. Right. You have an opinion that has been shifting across the United States, particularly with Republicans. And that opinion is getting less and less positive for Ukraine. This is Harry Enton. And I absolutely 100% disagree with his interpretation.
Well, I think the easiest way we can kind of just ask this is, do Americans like the way that Trump's handling his job and compare it to how they felt about Joe Biden? So this is the net approval rating. You look at Joe Biden back in 2024, he was 22 points underwater. Holy cow.
This is look at Donald Trump. Concerning Russia-Ukraine situation.
It's just a different planet entirely. I mean, the gulf between these two is wider than the Gulf of America or Mexico, depending on which side of the aisle you stand on. He's at +2. So look, at this particular point, Americans are giving Donald Trump the benefit of the doubt. He's doing considerably better than Joe Biden was doing on the handling of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And so on this simple question, I think Americans are saying, okay, Donald Trump's doing all right on this.
What about specifically on how they feel about bringing the war to an end?
Yeah, okay. So, look, questions on this can be quite complicated, but I think this kind of gets at sort of where the American trend line is. Americans on the Russia-Ukraine war want a quicker end of the war, but Russia keeps its captured land. Look at this, 50%, bare majority coming in here, support Ukraine's right to fight, even if it means a longer war. That's at 48. This is very, very close. But the trend line on this question is so important because that want a quick end of the war, look at this. You go back to August of 2022, it was at 31%. Now we're at 50%. I mean, that is a rocket ship upwards in terms of the Americans who want a quick end to the war, even if it means Russia keeps the captured Ukraine land. Americans are moving closer and closer to wanting a compromise, even if it means that Ukraine doesn't really get what it set out to want, at least at the beginning of this war.
And Americans' views on Russia are shifting as well.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the reasons why we're seeing this is Americans who say Russia is an enemy. You go back to 2023, it was 64%. In that CBS News YouGov poll, it was down to 34%. Now,
34% now think Russia is an enemy compared to 64%.
There is a chunk that believes that Russia is an unfriendly nation, but the percentage who believe that they're either an ally or friendly, that's up to 34% as well, basically equal to the percentage who say that they're an enemy. So views on Russia have become, let's say, a little less isolated in terms of wanting Russia to be way out there on their own, thinking that they're an enemy. At this particular point, they're starting to see Russia a little bit more friendly, and I think that's part of the reason why Americans want to see a compromise at this particular hour. So I think
now, it's not in that section. It's in another one. I'll see if I can find it. I think this is one. I mean, he's said it in so many different segments, and there are lots of Harry Enton bits I've seen, but I think it's at the end of this bit that I'm...
Even if it means a longer lasting war, the bottom line is this, is it's very clear very, very clear that Republicans want an end to this war. They are willing for Ukraine to give up that land that Russia currently has. They do not want this war extended. And I think what we saw yesterday in the White House was a clear illustration of that Republican point of view. Donald Trump representing Republicans well on this issue.
And it was there. I have heard him say it in a slightly different way, but nonetheless, like the idea that Trump is representing Republican thought is entirely wrong. It's got causality the wrong way round. It's not Donald Trump looking at polls and going, "Oh, okay, I better represent those my base in what I say to Zelensky." No, he's driven the base thought. The reason why, and I'm not going to bore you with the stats, but you look at the change of Republicans, GOP who want the Russia-Ukraine war to end, even if Russia keeps the land, has gone from 46 to 55 to 74%. That has been driven by the rhetoric coming out from JD Vance, from Elon Musk, from Donald Trump Jr., from all of these people. That thinking is driven. They are not. Those politicians are not reflecting thought, they're driving it. And I'm now going to give you an example of how they are consistently driving that thought. Here is the Secretary of Commerce.
You got to say, we love America, we appreciate America, you know, we want you by our side, and if you think we should have peace, we should have peace, right? But instead he said, I want $300 billion in reparations from Russia. I want them off my land. I want all the land, really, all the land, and reparations and security guarantees. The answer was...
I'm glad Wolf Blitzer pushes back. I would punch Lutnick full in the face here. Of course they want their land back. It's like Doris gets a house burgled. Thief is caught burgling. It has all this stuff. Police come round and say... And Doris goes, can I have all that stuff back? And Howard Lutnick, PC Howard Lutnick, goes, you want all that stuff back? Yeah, it's literally, he's just stolen it. He's got it in his hands. You want that stuff back? Who do you think you are? What kind of a neighbour do you think you are if you want the stuff that's been stolen from your house back? Don't be stupid. He's going to have half of that. Yeah, but, like, can't you help me get that back? Well, yeah, I can, but, you know, he's going to have half of it. And so these people are driving the thinking of the people that listen to them.
All the land and reparations and security guarantees. The answer was, it's just way too far. That's not a peacemaker.
It's just way too far. Wolf Blitzer says it's Ukrainian land. He says it's way too far. What is way too far to demand your land back?
That's a troublemaker, and that's what the president saw, and he took it for 40 minutes before and 45 minutes in front of the camera, and then it was just enough already. Enough.
All right. Thank you.
No, you do not end an interview with that hanging. You do not do that. You challenge the shit out of that man. That man is a bad human being, right? And this is driving opinion. And if you don't challenge it, then you allow people to be sucked in by this terrible rhetoric. Listen to Tommy Tuberville, a senator of ill repute, in my opinion.
Zelensky, for some reason, wants this war to keep going. And he has been, I guess, brainwashed by the globalist socialist group in Europe, and even some over here, that, hey, just keep this thing going. We'll keep funneling money to you. But they couldn't be more wrong. President Trump is tired of people dying, our American taxpayer dollars going over there. And so he'll try to get this finished. But Zelensky's going to play hardball. But you know what? He's not even in the game. It's going to be Putin and President Trump and the people on our side that will end up making this decision for the future of Ukraine.
So he's now advocating that Zelensky shouldn't even get to talk about the future of his own country. He's going to play hardball, but he's not going to get a look in because this is going to be a decision made between Trump and Russia. It's absolutely despicable. And then more. This is David Sachs, who's a terrible human being, with Jesse Waters from Fox News, who's a terrible human being.
Well, I'm not saying we shouldn't deal with him, but I think that Zelensky has powerful motivations not to make peace. I don't think he really wants to make peace. He says that the war needs to keep going on. He basically says the war needs to go on forever.
No, he doesn't.
And I think there's good reasons for that in his mind. Number one, if the war is over, he loses power, right? He canceled elections there. He's in the 6th year of a 5-year term.
He's presently 44% to the next Zelensky on 21% in the present polls on who would win the next presidential election.
And if he stands for elections, he's very unpopular there, despite what the fake polls from USAID say. And he'll be vulnerable to political retaliation from his political opponents. He needs this war to justify.
So what you're having is just people lying about him, saying that these fake polls from USAID is just absolutely unconscionable. And this is Donald Trump Jr.
Or didn't have Russia invade, unlike all the prior presidents and Joe Biden, their neighboring nations. Why don't we bring that back? Ukraine can overperform. I mean, I don't think they're winning. It seems like, the news will say, every time Russia makes a gain, it's not really a significant strategic victory. Every time Ukraine makes some sort of gain, it's very significant strategic. No one knows. Okay, they don't know. They're trying to make it seem, but this has been going on forever. Obviously, Russia has underperformed. Everyone thought this thing would be over in 2 weeks, but when they ask for F-16s, then what's next? Where does it end? Where does the blank check stop? So,
remember, this is back in 2023.
Everything that Trump's been right about. You can see his tweet on Truth Social, like, first come the tanks. It's going to never end. Until we say enough is enough, no one's coming to the table. Until we say we're not funding this crap anymore, no one has an incentive to negotiate. At what point does Russia...
So the idea of Ron Filipkowski posting this is, like, you understand why Donald Trump Sr. has stopped aid to Ukraine. This is exactly what his son has been advocating for 1.5 years.
Say, hey, you know what? Now that we're at war with the United States, essentially, now we've been in a proxy war for basically, a year at this point. I mean, since its inception, right? If you miss your taxes by $2, the IRS is coming to visit you. The Pentagon, what's a couple $100 billion between friends? So I imagine there's more money being sent over there. So, and as long as they're doing that, and I imagine as long as people are grifting off of this and making their billions and stealing whatever it is, and, we see the Taliban's now selling our vehicles that we left there of the billions in equipment there to Russia so they can use it against Ukraine, who we're supporting in this proxy war. When does it end? When do people in Russia say, hey, we're fighting the U.S. at this point, and escalate? Because that's what I'm worried about. This stuff should be overstacked.
And that's exactly what's happening. But this is a kind of rhetoric that is falling on fertile ground with the people who watch this stuff. Like Fox News' Laura Ingraham.
OMG. This isn't even a new strategy. This is warmed over Russian collusion. Oh, how original. It was just 3 days after the man dressed like Captain Spock was booted without lunch from the White House. We're getting a much clearer picture.
So, this man dressed like Captain Spock, just drip feeding criticism of Ukraine and Zelensky just constantly.
Okay, Putin doesn't want this war. Zelensky doesn't want this war. Trump doesn't want this. So they're all in agreement.
But they're not in agreement because this actually has to come down to the brass tacks of how that country gets split up.
And who holds the car.
So Jessica Tarlov, of all these 5, she's the only liberal on there, and all the other 4 just pile on her. She's standing up for Ukraine. The rest of them aren't.
No. I get it.
Zelensky.
Man, I get it. I heard it. Tommy Tuberville was on TV today saying this is about what Putin and Donald Trump want. This doesn't have to do with Zelensky. But guess what? There are millions of Ukrainians who would beg to differ. No, they're not dead.
Already
there
dead.
are a lot.
Millions of Ukrainians. Greg Gutfeld just goes, who are dead? Like, there are no Ukrainians left. They're already dead. All of them are dead.
Future with him. They do not have a future with Zelensky. Zelensky is dependent upon us.
Do you guys get what you're saying? You're just saying that a sovereign country. Saying? Yes, I do. Besides the blasphemy word, which maybe I shouldn't have used, I know exactly what I was saying.
It's time for Ukraine to start building
to become
and stop
part
the killing.
of Russia again.
Nobody's
That's what
making it part of Russia.
You're telling them you can't be part of NATO. You're telling them you don't get your territory back.
No, because that was agreed upon decades ago.
False.
And every decade they move closer and closer to Russia, NATO has. And the Crimea and everything else is a response to NATO.
For Russia. NATO encroaching on them.
They are an independent country who believes strong. And I'm not pro-Russia at all.
Really?
But
it doesn't sound like that.
Don't give me that,
really.
Don't give me that. Don't give me that. You know what? The truth is they stand for this, and they don't want NATO any closer, and it's been decades that's been agreed to.
They invaded a sovereign nation and
do you remember 3 years ago?
They've stolen their children.
Okay,
3 years ago.
1 second, Jessica. No. 3 years ago, I sat here and I said the Russian-Ukrainian thing is like a family fight across the street. We don't want to go over there and get in between a family fight. We
These are all things that Putin wants to hear. And you know that because his own spokesman, Peskov, said as much, said the rapidly changing U.S. foreign policy configurations largely coincides with our vision. Dmitry Medvedev, the insolent pig about Zelensky, finally got a proper slapdown in the Oval Office. Trump is right. The Kyiv regime is gambling with World War III. So if you are satisfying someone that we all agree is a dictator and authoritarian to that level, don't you think maybe the methods aren't that great? And that's not to say that we don't need to come to the table and say, this is what our peace plan is. These are the territorial lines that we are comfortable with. No one thinks that he's going back to a pre-2014 era. Zelensky himself doesn't think that.
I
He
don't
was
think it's
speaking
smart,
a week
though,
ago.
Jessica.
These are all.
So the point is, look, if you're advocating for something that the Russians are really agreeing to, and they are celebrating, then maybe you've got it wrong. And then here's one more Republican congresswoman.
I mean, the big question was Zelensky ready for peace when he went to the Oval Office? But do you think that Russian President Putin is ready for peace? And would he be open to that?
Yeah, I think that Putin was waiting for an America that was willing to actually bring Zelensky to the table. To be clear, the Ukrainians never had a plan of actually winning that war. So we sent, I don't know, what, billions of dollars over there. Then we also find out that they're also getting our Social Security checks. I mean, this is absurd. And
Now Ukrainians are receiving American Social Security checks.
and to come to the White House and to demand what they did. Frankly, a good leader, any leader would tell you, especially those with a military background, that you do peace through strength, and that should be your first point, and that you would want to actually not want to put your people in harm's way. And so the fact that
She completely contradicted herself. Peace through strength. So you give Ukraine the strength they need to negotiate themselves to a peaceful settlement. I mean, and she goes on, I mean, all of these people are horrific and they have horrific things to say. But this is only coming from the GOP. It's only coming from one side of the aisle in the United States. And then when you look at the stats that suggest that the Republican voters are moving on Ukraine, then if they're listening to this day in, day out, that's why they're moving. And I think it's absolutely disgusting. It's disgusting. Right, Katty Kay and Antti Scaramucci on The Rest is Politics.
What Donald Trump put out, let me ask you, Anthony, what is Donald Trump thinking at the moment?
I'm a bully. I've got the quote-unquote better cards. I need to show people that I'm tough and America is not going to get pushed around. And there was a big gravy train for Zelensky, and he's bought into the talking points that there's been money laundering and all kinds of nefarious activities in the Ukraine. And so he's going to push them around. And then there's an end game. And so you articulated before we went live what that end game is. And so why don't you tell our viewers and listeners, Katty, because I think you have a brilliant insight into what the end game is.
Yeah, so I spent the weekend kind of getting phone calls from people who are close to Donald Trump, specifically on the kind of Ukraine-Russia issue, and also from a senior Democratic senator. And so I'm kind of getting a sense of what they're thinking. The message from Trump world is that Zelensky does not want peace, and that Zelensky needs to go on Fox News and not just profusely apologize. He has to do this on camera to make Donald Trump happy, but potentially even resign. Donald Trump has said that's not what he's asking for, but that might be something that he needs to do. But the main message that came to me from kind of MAGA world very quickly, and you heard it coordinated all over the weekend on the Sunday shows, was that it's Zelensky who doesn't want peace. And their argument is that, a bit like this person who advises Trump on Ukraine said to me, look, it was kind of weird comparison. He said, he's just like Bibi Netanyahu. He wants the war to go on as long as possible because that helps President Zelensky. And so it's kind of, this is somebody who knows.
Which is just what you've heard from some of those people. And of course, that's the complete misinterpretation, which is he wants it to go on. And so until the point where they can bring about a just peace. Like, there's a great saying, someone said it on one of my threads. He wants a just peace, not just peace. He wants a just peace, not just peace. The peace has to be one that is fair for Ukraine, who is the victim here, not just a quick peace that will benefit Russia. And so therefore you need to provide weaponry, and Russia are in trouble economically and militarily. Now's the time. If you really wanted a just peace, now's the time to support Ukraine as much as possible. But the US is not interested in a just peace. They just want to get on with doing what is easier. That's the point. They want an easy peace. You've got Trump doing these babbling speeches here where, someone's just taking it apart. Russia wants a deal. I gave Ukraine javelins, which is all controversial. Russia took nothing under Trump. We need a deal under Trump. Russia got nothing. Blah blah blah. And this analysis, the whole statement is just projection, lies, and insecurity wrapped into one steaming pile. Trump didn't stop Putin. Trump was Putin's weapon, and now they both want peace, meaning that Ukraine surrenders, Europe bends over, and America kisses the Kremlin ring. That's the deal, that's the truth, that's a sellout that's happening in real time. And I completely agree. Whereas, the other side of the aisle, you get this kind of rhetoric, which is what I want to hear.
Zelensky is watching 70,000 dead Ukrainians. Every single day, missiles are slamming into hospitals. Children are being killed on their way to school. This is what he's seeing. And he comes to the Oval Office and a reporter asks him why he's not wearing a suit. And JD Vance says, you don't say thank you? Think about it. Look, Tulsi has this theory that Zelensky was a little aggressive. He's presided over a brutal invasion, 70,000 dead Ukrainians, and the VP, the effing VP, wants him to say thank you for the aid that we've grudgingly provided. By the way, too late. Thank you to the Republicans in the Congress. It took us a year to get that supplemental package done. Zelensky is...
Absolutely. It's just incredible. Right, Kalen Robertson, that I just interviewed the other week, said, who's in Kiev at the moment, Russia was on its knees, economy ruined, and an army on donkeys. Trump has just saved them from the brink of collapse. Imagine you're Hitler in 1945. Berlin is burning, and just before you lose all hope, the US president saves you. That's what this is. America siding with tyranny over its closest allies. And that's why so many great Americans on all sides of politics are standing up now and protesting what's going on. But then so many aren't. So many are advocating this. JD Vance is saying that the US is working on a peace deal with Russia after Trump cuts aid to Ukraine. Working with Russia. That's what he's saying. The door for talks remains open. Trump felt little respect from Zelensky, which is why he insisted that their conversation on February the 28th was held not face to face, but in front of the cameras. He wanted an ambush. There's an acceptance that this was all just a setup. Right? Which is what PS01 says. It was a setup. Vance admits it. Trump felt little respect from Zelensky, which is why he didn't want it face to face, but he wanted it in front of the cameras. JD Vance then brags America is in ongoing negotiations with Russia and suggests that Putin is more trustworthy and cooperative than Ukraine. Just absolutely despicable. This was Sean Hannity.
That if he called and had a serious proposal for how he was going to engage in the process. Look, there are details that really matter that we're already working on with the Russians. We've already talked with some of our allies. He needs to engage seriously on the details. I think once that happens, then absolutely we want to talk to the Ukrainians.
Are you convinced Putin and the Russians are willing to meet them, I don't want to say the word halfway, they're willing to do their part to achieve a negotiated settlement?
Am I convinced? No. But do I think that there's a real pathway? You got to trust but verify. You've got to engage in the negotiation. You've got to see what steps people are willing to take. This is another thing. I think that if he called...
So it just seems like they trust Putin more than Zelensky. Now, Reuters is reporting that the US is developing a plan to potentially ease sanctions on Russia as Trump seeks to restore ties with Moscow and stop the war in Ukraine. Stopping the war in Ukraine appears to be just getting Ukraine to surrender. US officials have held unofficial talks with Zelensky and his team following the Friday exchange in the Oval Office per CNN. The goal is to steer negotiations back on track, but does that just entail Zelensky to just submit publicly to Trump? This administration is the most clownish amateur hour stuff that I've seen. For days and days they've been asking for public apologies on air repeatedly. Now this gaslighting idiot claims it's really private engagement that is lacking. JD Vance is a shifty twerp, says John Jackson. So this is the idea. I think the most important thing, says JD Vance, a lot of people have made this about public statements. President Zelensky needs to say that he's committed to the peace, or President Zelensky needs to apologize to President Trump. The public stuff doesn't matter nearly as much as what the Ukrainians doing to meaningfully engage in what a peaceful settlement would look like. We need the Ukrainians privately to come to us and say, this is what we need, this is what we want, this is how we're going to participate in the process at the end to end this conflict. That is the most important thing, and the lack of private engagement is what's most concerning to us, which is completely opposite to what he's previously said. That's why he's saying he's so shifty. It's like he's calling him out, say he needs to apologize, he needs to say this was unacceptable, and then when he's called up on that, it's like, oh, that's not important. What's really important is that they contact us privately. Vance denies that a lack of there is a lack of Trump administration's pressure on Russia. Quote, we will have a number of sanctions that are placed on Russians. We still have a number. We do believe the Russians economically are struggling because of this conflict. Yes, the sanctions that Biden put in place, and you have not done anything about, apart from appear to want to relieve them. You are in negotiations with Russia to relieve those sanctions. So yes, we're worried that there is a lack of pressure from your administration on Russia, and it gets to the point where I fully agree with Bill Maher here.
And he said he was going to have this great strategy to end the Ukrainian war. You know, we couldn't hear what it was. And then when he got into office, what was the strategy? Give up. Just give up. He just surrendered everything immediately. That's I've never seen anyone negotiate.
Nobody negotiates. You haven't seen it because nobody negotiates like that.
Right. Yeah. It's crazy. I mean, he could have asked for a few things before he just capitulated.
He said, I mean, well, I don't mean to cut. So you wanted to say something?
No.
It's just a rare moment of me giving the microphone away. So go ahead. Take advantage of it.
You know, what's sad about this is you watch foreign leaders, and they've figured him out. So if you watch, Justin Trudeau, he said you begin by praising him lavishly. Right. You say, oh, you did everything right. Then you give him none of what he wanted. You announce some bullshit concession. There was some stuff you had already done. And he beams. The king of Jordan did it brilliantly. He said, Trump asked him to take 2 million Palestinians from Gaza. And he says, because of your wisdom and your leadership and your foresight, we're going to take 2,000 kids to treat them medically and send them back. And Trump beamed. It was like, I won.
Exactly. That's how to deal with him. It's interesting that Julia Ioffe, who right at the beginning of this war, I showed this interview. It's a fascinating interview, really good. But one of the lines from it was, so she said, at the 2018 NATO summit, I ran into a former advisor for Dmitry Medvedev, and I asked him what Moscow thought of Trump. And the quote is, to us, he looks like a wrecking ball. Our wrecking ball. Now, a couple of years later, that was 2018, 2025. That's exactly what's going on. Now, I wonder about, I was going to read this, I don't have time now. This is a really good analysis of the minerals deal and how Ukraine worked a masterpiece in the minerals agreement with the United States. So we're back to the idea that the minerals deal, as it was rewritten by Ukraine, is actually vague enough not to really be anything to worry about. But now we're hearing that the Ukraine natural resources deal is not ready as Trump seeks better terms. So I think now people have paid attention to all this analysis that's stating that actually that's a pretty good deal for Ukraine, or at least it's not as bad as it was, where it's like, we want $500 billion of your natural resources. Now the US is going, actually that deal's crap and we want to screw you over even more. So the deal is now no longer ready to sign, whereas it was ready to sign in the White House. So this is an absolute shocker. Despite a public plea for peace and willingness to negotiate, Zelensky remains at an impasse with the Trump administration over critical military aid to Ukraine. So that military aid is still shut off to Ukraine. Meanwhile, Lukashenko from Belarus has said we need to dig and see, as he orders his people to find rare earth metals in Belarus. This is a way out of sanctions, which is let's go and do a deal with the US, and then they'll just roll over and tickle our belly. But of course, we've seen, like I've said before, this is a Reuters article from 2017. Trump Ghani, who was the leader at the time in Afghanistan, agreed that the US can help develop Afghanistan's rare earth minerals. This was a kind of, we'll sell you our rare earth minerals. And meanwhile, Trump went over his head to do a deal with the Taliban. So this is Zelensky saying, we're going to get you our rare earth minerals. Meanwhile, Trump goes over the heads of Zelensky to deal with the other terrorists, Putin and his regime. History is repeating itself. Don't we learn from the past that the 3 times that the Ukrainians have had military aid stopped by Trump? 2019, when he wanted dirt on Hunter Biden and tried to blackmail them for javelins. Then in 2023 to 2024, for 7 months, where there was an impasse because Mike Johnson was following orders from Trump. And now, 3 times, Donald Trump has stopped military aid going to Ukraine. He's not a friend of Ukraine. End of. Like, we need to realize this. Now, even Grok, which is like the AI aspect to Twitter, to X, has been asked, what is the likelihood from 1 to 100 that Trump is a Putin-compromised asset? Use all publicly available information from the internet. Grok estimates with 75 to 85% certainty that Trump is a Putin-compromised asset. Take all the information we've got on the internet, go for it. Tell us whether what's the probability that Trump is compromised? 75 to 85%. That's a damn good probability. Absolutely astonishing. But of course, so Trump's given no aid to Ukraine, but given, 18 billion to Israel. Ukraine is being treated as though it's the enemy. It's another example of the loathing this administration has for Ukraine for getting in the way of a relationship with Putin. The decent people of Ukraine are being used in a game this administration plays that has nothing to do with the security and peace for Ukraine. It's about the relationship with Putin, with Trump, and whatever bizarre bargain they have struck with him. That's about as good a synopsis as I could work out. And here, the American Enterprise Institute, however, which is a kind of otherwise a right-wing free market think tank, but they have been aligned with Ukraine since the beginning. Russian strategy has been rewarded for holding out until Western support faltered. There should be no reason to expect Putin to compromise on his objective of Ukrainian destruction, writes AEI's Corey Shaker, or Corey Shake, Sharker. You quote, Ukraine will have to fight a different kind of war without the US. Its cities will experience more destruction and its citizens more civilian casualties without the air defenses the US has provided. And it will be to America's lasting shame that we won't be helping. And I am just really fed up with where this administration is going, to the point where I'm thinking this isn't AI. As Mikhailo Golub says, this isn't AI. So I'm going to leave you with this AI mock-up. Kash Patel, Joe Rogan, JD Vance, Andrew Tate, and Elon Musk, and obviously Donald Trump, and Mark Zuckerberg. It's amazing what AI can do, isn't it, these days? All these people supporting, well, really bowing down to Putin, becoming useful assets of, and there you go, Putin, the bear, with Trump on all fours. And then Vance on all fours. And then the brilliant breathing of Marco Rubio there. Just all of this. And so it goes on. Just this sums up how I see only MAGA Republicanism, I have to say. There's a real difference there. At the moment, it is just doing everything it can to support Russia and to support Putin. And even when someone like Marco Rubio, that's previously, prior to the election, was standing up strong for Ukraine, wanted to expand USAID, wanted to be really harsh on Russia, gets into Secretary of State and has to capitulate entirely to Putin and thus to Trump. It's an absolute shocker. Anyway, thanks for watching. Sorry it's a long one. Take care and speak to you soon.